What do you do when economies collapse and the experts in charge insist it's just bad luck? If you're Anna Schwartz, you don't argue louder. You built a dataset so precise, it forces history itself to testify. Welcome to this 4-part mini-series spotlighting women from history who use maths to solve real-world problems, transforming the fields of medicine, banking, accountancy, and economics. For Women's History Month on Breaking Math, I'm Autumn Fanaff.
I'm Dr. Victoria Bateman. Throughout time, women's contributions have often been underappreciated, yet they've shaped policy, theory and practice in profound ways. Here, we honour their stories, highlight their ideas and celebrate the impact they've had on shaping our world. Let's begin. Today, we're talking about Anna Schwartz, a pioneering American economist who was born in the Bronx in 1915 and who transformed how we study economies by putting data front and centre. And what she was able to show with that data changed economic policy forever. In fact, some might say that she saved us from a repeat of the Great Depression. So, Autumn, tell me, why is Anna Schwartz one of your favourite women from history?
She's a little, I'll call it numerically controversial, but in the most positive sense. The fate of entire economies was hinged not on political speeches or bold predictions, but on who had the courage to check the numbers. That's one reason Anna Schwartz is one of my favorite women from history. She was a groundbreaking American economist and statistician who fundamentally changed how we understand economic reality. At a time when economists often relied on elegant theories and persuasive rhetoric, Schwartz insisted on something far less glamorous and far more powerful: evidence. Through her landmark work, A Monetary History of the United States, co-authored by Milton Friedman, she used decades of carefully reconstructed data that shifts in the money supplies are deeply tied booms, recessions, and financial crises. What I admire most about her is that she didn't just contribute to the economics, she reshaped its standards. She helped transform macroeconomics into discipline grounded in measurable proof, where claims must be testable, reproducible, and supported by data rather than just authority. In other words, she didn't just study the economy, she taught the world how to measure it. Victoria, can you give me a little bit of context about this time period?
Of course. Schwartz was at school in 1929 when the economy spectacularly crashed. Within the next few years, the unemployment rate reached 25%, and banks were failing on every main street. This was the Great Depression, and she wanted to understand its causes. Why economies veer from boom to bust, and whether depressions are avoidable. And she believed that to answer these questions, we needed data on the economy going back into history so that we can see what was going on in the good times and the bad times. Now, Schwartz worked during a period when economics was undergoing a methodological shift. Mid-20th century economists certainly debated big questions like what causes depressions and should governments intervene, but often without strong empirical evidence.
So you're saying computing technology was limited, data sets were incomplete, and statistical archives were scattered?
That's correct. And Schwartz helped build the infrastructure of modern economic data analysis almost from scratch. And this caused her a lot of challenges in early economics and quantitative research. Is that right, Autumn?
Yes, it's an overly male-dominated field. So women were often excluded from academic appointments, research leadership, and professional recognition. And many women economists were confined to assistant roles or statistical support rather than credited as intellectual leaders. And in fact, Schwartz, despite passing all of her coursework for a PhD and having her PhD research published for many years, was denied her PhD, but she carried on nevertheless, going to work at the NBER, which was the National Bureau of Economic Research, the leading economic research institution in the US, a place where data mattered more than anything. Schwartz not only entered the field of economics, she helped redefine it through data. And she demonstrated that rigorous statistical reasoning was not support work, but the intellectual backbone of economic theory itself. Now, I'm not the economist, but can you dive a little into her work for me?
So her best known work, which is the one you've mentioned, A Monetary History of the United States, published in 1963, which she wrote with Friedman, who was later awarded a Nobel Prize in economics, is a brick of a book. I mean, you literally will not find a longer book in an economics library. And it became one of the most influential books of the 20th century. While it was data heavy, it provided, for the first time, historic data on the US money supply. It also had a grand historical narrative, and out of that came a very provocative argument. Essentially, Schwartz and Friedman blamed the Federal Reserve, the US central bank, for the Great Depression. They revealed that the Fed had allowed the money supply to collapse in a way that was completely avoidable. And they did that basically by refusing to take action in regard to the spate of bank failures occurring at that time. So as banks failed, people lost their savings and loans and credit became impossible to get. And that all led to a huge contraction in the amount of money available in the economy, basically sucking the lifeblood out of the economy. And essentially, the Fed just stood by and watched. They literally did nothing. Now, more generally, this book, A Monetary History, showed just how much the ups and downs of the economy across time have been driven by the money supply expanding or contracting, rather than being kept stable and steady. And it was that revelation that offered an entirely new economic policy framework. And we can refer to that very famously as monetarism. And that involved central banks keeping a close eye on and control of the money supply so as to help stabilize the economy. And that has continued to have a legacy into the 21st century. So, in fact, it was this book that was almost single-handedly responsible for the Fed taking action during the global financial crisis in 2007 to 2009. So, to avert depression, to avoid a repeat of the Great Depression, what the Fed did at that time was to pump money into the economy and lower interest rates, things that they just did not do back in 1929 and in the early 1930s.
At least we learned this time that history repeats itself.
We certainly did.
But what I find fascinating about this is just how much of this work is grounded in mathematics and statistics.
Yes, I mean, Schwartz's methodological philosophy was to treat economies like they're measurable systems that could be studied with the same rigor as physical phenomena. So instead of debating ideology, she did the hard work of reconstructing decades of monetary data and analysing it using statistical tools. So, her work emphasised, building long-run data sets across decades, distinguishing correlation from causation, testing competing economic models against real evidence, and quantifying uncertainty rather than ignoring it. And today, all of those principles are standard practice in economics and policy making. So in many ways, Schwartz helped define what it means for economics to be a modern-day quantitative science. What's interesting is Milton Friedman, who got the Nobel Prize for his work on money and the economy, humbly said, "Anna did all of the work and I got most of the recognition." Schwartz deserves so much more credit than she's ever been given.
Isn't that the stereotype for women in male-dominated fields?
It's a thing repeated, isn't it, in virtually every field.
Yep.
And so Autumn, do you have any fun facts about Anna Schwartz?
Yes. One of my favorite things about her was that she stayed intellectually fierce into her 80s and 90s, and she never retired. She passed away in 2012 at the age of 96. While most of the people her age slowed down, she was still publishing research and helping junior colleagues with theirs.
That's true. And, you can go on YouTube. Anyone listening now can go on YouTube and find a 2.5 hour long interview with her when she was in her 80s. And about 2 hours into that interview, the interviewer, and she's the brilliant Nobel Prize-winning economist Claudia Goldin, asks Anna Schwartz if she can just stay a bit longer, if they can carry on beyond the 2 hours and just do another half an hour of recording. And Schwartz replies that she's got a lot to do before then happily carrying on. So she was certainly a busy lady, busy with research to the very end of her life.
Absolutely. And that dry wit about her. Yeah, I gotta give her kudos for that. She once joked that economists shouldn't argue about theories until they've looked at data long enough for it to talk back. So there you go. Colleagues said that she had a gift for ending long academic debates with just one perfectly chosen number. And despite her formidable reputation, those who met her often described her as soft-spoken and modest, someone who let the evidence, not her ego, do the talking.
And she also had a love of music. She liked going to concerts and to the opera. And I've often found it interesting how much people who are passionate about maths can also be passionate about music. So perhaps we can think of her next time we listen to some classical music.
Clearly, that's pattern recognition. So we got something going on there. Now, Anna Schwartz believed something radical for her time, that economics should be accountable to evidence, not ideology, not elegance, and definitely not authority. It was simply data. She helped show monetary policy wasn't abstract. It shaped livelihoods, recessions, and recoveries. She insisted that if you look at numbers long enough, they start to talk back. And I guess that's what I just love about her. She didn't shout. She didn't posture. She didn't chase intellectual fashion. She asked, what do the records actually say? And in a world that still argues loudly about economies, inflation, and crises, her legacy is a quiet standard. Before you argue, measure. And as always, stay curious. You might just change history.